I was 11 years old. I had practiced piano for 4 months. My teacher said I had real gift. My mother missed the recital. When I came home, second place ribbon in my hand, she was at the kitchen table consoling my brother with ice cream. I set the ribbon on the counter. She glanced over. She said without looking up, "Second is still something, Maggie." Maggie, that is not my name. It has never been my name. She didn't even look up to see which daughter was standing there. The porch light runs on a timer. 6:40 every evening, October through March. It clicks on automatically, the way certain things in a house learn to do when the person who set them is no longer there to do it by hand. David installed it the first winter we moved in. He said he didn't want me coming home to a dark porch. That was 22 years ago. Last Tuesday, the light clicked on at 6:42, and my mother's car pulled into my driveway at 6:43. I didn't recognize the car. That was the first thing I noticed. A white sedan, slightly dented along the rear passenger door, not her usual vehicle, which told me either the car had been sold or she was borrowing someone else's. I found out later it was Daniel's. He'd lent it to her for the drive, which meant he knew she was coming, which meant this was planned. I was at the kitchen window when she got out. She moved carefully. She is 78 and her knees have not been cooperative for the past few years, and she smoothed the front of her coat before she closed the car door. That gesture. I have seen that gesture my entire life. It is the gesture of a woman preparing to be seen. Then she opened the back door of the sedan, and she pulled out a suitcase. Not an overnight bag. Not the small canvas duffel she has carried since 1994. A full-sized suitcase, the kind you check at the airport. She set it on the driveway. Then she reached in again, 2 suitcases. I stood at that window for 3 full seconds without moving because 2 suitcases is not a visit. 2 suitcases is a decision someone made and made without asking. I went to the door. She looked smaller than I remembered. She smiled when she saw me. Wide, warm, the specific warmth of a woman who has already decided the conversation is going well. "Caro," she said, "you look wonderful." She did not say, "I should have called." She did not say, "I'm sorry it's been so long." She stepped forward and hugged me, one firm arm around my shoulders, the brief press of her cheek against mine. And then she stepped back and looked at the house the way people look at places they have decided they are going to be comfortable in. "Is the guest room still set up?" I said yes. I picked up the smaller suitcase. My mother followed me inside with the ease of someone who had never considered that she might not be welcome. I made tea. That is what I do when I don't know what to say. I fill a kettle and I stand at the stove and I wait for something to boil, which at least gives me somewhere to put my eyes. She sat at my kitchen table and she talked. About the drive. About her knees. About Daniel. And here is the thing I noticed, sitting with you now, that I did not fully register then. She used the word "we" the entire time. We are dealing with a financial situation. We are figuring out next steps. We thought it might be good for her to have some time away while things got sorted. We. As though she and Daniel were a unit with a shared problem and I was a separate category of person who might be useful to that unit. Adjacent. Available. I set her mug on the table. I sat across from her. I asked, carefully, what had happened with the house. She waved her hand. "It's in transition," she said. "Daniel is handling it. Daniel is handling it, the house that used to be my parents' house, the house I grew up in, the house I had not, at that point, yet fully understood had never been going to be mine. Daniel just needs a little more time to sort things out," she said. "You know how he is. You've always been the one who figures things out on her own." She said it like a compliment. I have been hearing that sentence for 40 years. It has never been a compliment. It is the family's standing verdict on why I do not need what other people need. Why patience from me is expected, not appreciated. Why showing up has never been counted in my column, only in theirs. She said it, and she picked up her mug, and she looked around my living room with something that looked almost like satisfaction. She said it like it was a compliment, like being capable was the same as being fine. If someone in your life has ever said something like that to you, smiled while they said it, you already know exactly what I felt standing in that kitchen. Keep listening, because that sentence is going to mean something very different by the end of this story. She went to bed at 9:30. I washed the mugs. I turned off the kitchen light. I stood in the hallway for a moment, narrow, original tile, the slight cold of it coming through my socks, and listened to the particular silence of a house that had adjusted itself around 2 people and was now holding 3. Then I went upstairs to my home office. There is a shelf in the closet, high up, the kind of shelf you have to stand on a step to reach. And on that shelf is a box that came from my father's things after he died 2 years ago. I almost donated it. When I was clearing his study, it looked like work files, columns of numbers in his handwriting, nothing personal. I set it aside, told myself I'd deal with it later. I climbed up and brought it down. I set it on my desk. I didn't open it. I don't know why I did it then, at 9:45 on a Tuesday, with my mother asleep 6 feet down the hall. I just did. My mother slept in my guest room that night, and somewhere between turning off the kitchen light and sitting down on the edge of my own bed, I thought about something David had said to me from a hospital bed 4 years ago. He'd said, "Your father's pad. Don't lose it. It matters." I hadn't understood it then. I'd been holding his hand and memorizing his face, and I filed the words away the way you file things you can't process yet. Lying there in the dark, my mother 6 feet down the hall, her 2 suitcases against the guest room wall, I started to wonder if I finally needed to. 5:18 in the morning. The kitchen faces east, and in late October the light at that hour is not really light yet. It is the suggestion of light, gray and thin through the window above the sink. The coffee maker's amber glow was the brightest thing in the room. I had been sitting at the table for 40 minutes with a mug I had stopped drinking from, watching that window the way you watch something when you are not really watching anything at all. The chair across from me was empty. It is always empty now, has been for 4 years. But this morning it felt empty in a different way because my mother had sat in it 6 hours ago, and the air in the room still held the particular shape of someone who had recently been present and was now just upstairs. Asleep, unburdened. My mother said Daniel's name 6 times in the first hour. She said mine twice, once when she arrived, once when she asked about the guest room. That was the first number that did not add up, and once I started adding, I could not stop. I thought about the wedding first. That is usually where I start when I am being honest with myself, not childhood, because childhood is too far back to feel real at 5 in the morning. The wedding is close enough to still have edges. David and I married in 1998. My parents contributed $800. My mother announced the amount at dinner like a sacrifice. 2 years later, Daniel's first wedding cost $12,000. My parents paid for it. I found out from a cousin at Christmas. That was my first mistake, assuming separate incidents required separate explanations. But at 5:18 in my kitchen, with my mother asleep upstairs and her suitcases against the guest room wall, I stopped giving them separate explanations. I went further back. I was 19. I had earned a partial academic scholarship to Ohio State partial, which meant there was a gap. $1,200 a year. I asked my parents if they could help cover it. My mother said, "You're smart enough to figure it out, Caro. Get a part-time job." I did. I worked food service for 4 years. I graduated with honors. Nobody came to the ceremony. Daniel had a soccer tournament that weekend. He was 13, and my parents went to the game. That same month, the same month I asked for $1,200 and was told to figure it out, my parents enrolled Daniel in a private academic enrichment program for $4,000 a semester. And then I went back further. I was 11 years old, and I had been practicing piano for 4 months. My teacher, Mrs. Akoy, had told my mother directly, in a phone call I was not supposed to overhear, that I had real gift. That word, gift, I held it like something fragile for weeks. The recital was on a Saturday in November. That same Saturday, Daniel, 7 years old, newly enrolled in a local baseball league, had his second game of the season, not a championship. Not anything his coach had flagged as important. His second regular game of a recreational season. My mother went to the game. I performed to a near-empty auditorium. A few other parents, Mrs. Acoy in the front row, the particular echo of a room that is mostly chairs. I placed second. I walked home in the November cold with a second-place ribbon, and I went into the kitchen, and my mother was at the table, Daniel beside her, a bowl of ice cream in front of him because his team had lost and he was upset. My mother had her hand on his shoulder. I set my ribbon on the counter beside the sink. My mother glanced over. She said, without looking up, without turning around to see which of her children was standing there, she said, "Second is still something, Maggie. Maggie, that is not my name. My name is Caroline, has always been Caroline." She didn't look up. She didn't turn around. She called me by the wrong name and went back to the ice cream. She didn't look up. That is the part I have never said out loud before, not to most people, not even fully to myself. Not the ribbon, not the second place. The counter, the not looking up. If someone in your family has ever made you feel invisible while standing right in front of them, drop the word "seen" in the comments. I need you to know you are not alone in this room. Raymond was at work that day. He didn't know about the ribbon. He found out 30 years later. David told him quietly, one afternoon when they were sitting on my parents' back porch, and I was inside helping my mother with something. I don't know exactly what David said. I only know that Raymond came inside 20 minutes later, and his eyes were red, and he patted my hand at the dinner table and didn't explain why. I asked David about it that night in the car home. He told me. He said, "Your father cried, Caro. He actually cried." I didn't know what to do with that. I still don't entirely. I'm going to tell you something I didn't understand until I was 54 years old sitting in my own kitchen before sunrise. My mother didn't forget me. She categorized me. There is a difference. Forgetting is an accident. A category is a decision made once early and never revisited. If you want to hear how I finally understood that and what I did about it, subscribe. We are just getting started. My mother came downstairs at 7:15. I heard her on the stairs, careful, deliberate steps, the particular sound of someone who is not familiar enough with a house to move through it in the dark. She opened the wrong cabinet twice looking for the mugs, found them on the third try, poured herself coffee without asking if there was more, sat down across from me in the chair that had been empty all morning. She looked rested. She looked genuinely rested. She set her mug down and she said, "Daniel is going to need a little more time to sort himself out, you know. You know how he is." She smiled. "You've always been the one who figures things out on her own." I looked at her over my coffee. Third time, 40 years, same sentence, same cadence, same small, satisfied nod at the end as though she had just said something generous. She didn't ask. She never asked. She picked up her mug and I thought, there is something in a box on my desk upstairs. Something David told me not to lose. I think it's time. The office smells like old paper and cedar. David's jacket is still on the back of the door. I have not moved it. I don't know that I will. It is a gray wool blazer, slightly worn at the left cuff from years of resting on desk edges, and it still carries the faintest trace of the cedar soap he used his entire adult life. Some mornings I come in here and I don't notice it. Some mornings it stops me in the doorway. Today I noticed it. November light through the single window, flat and pale, the kind that doesn't cast shadows so much as it removes them. 4 in the afternoon. My mother was downstairs. I could hear her, faintly, on the phone. Not the words, just the rhythm, her voice, and beneath it the occasional pause of someone listening. She'd been on and off the phone most of the day. I didn't need to ask who she was talking to. The box from my father's things was on the desk where I'd left it the night before, still closed. I had told myself all day I was going to deal with it. Sort the papers, donate what wasn't useful, file what was. I sat down, I opened it. It looked exactly like what I'd assumed it was. Work files. a folder of old tax returns, his own from the 90s, a rubber-banded stack of utility receipts, years out of date, kept for reasons only accountants fully understand. And underneath those, a yellow legal pad, college ruled, the same brand he'd bought from the same drugstore his entire career. I grew up seeing these pads stacked on his home office desk, covered in his handwriting, small, precise, the particular neatness of a man who treated numbers as something that deserved care. I almost set it aside with the tax returns. Instead, I opened it. The first page was dated 1998. Columns, dates in the left margin, dollar amounts in the center, a brief notation on the right. I read the first entry, then the second. I assumed I was looking at client notes, some old project he'd brought home. By the third page, I knew I wasn't. The column on the right didn't contain client names. It contained a single name, repeated across 25 years of entries: Daniel. I read slowly, carefully. The way you read something when you are not sure yet what you are holding, but you understand, in some part of yourself that works faster than conscious thought, that you need to read every word. 1998 joint savings account opened. Patricia Hayes and Daniel Hayes. Dollar amounts flowing in regular monthly like a salary. Not Raymond's account, not a family account. Patricia and Daniel. 2007 food truck venture. $22,000. The notation beside it read, P said D needs a start. I said we should ask C first. P said C doesn't need it. I set the pad down. I picked it back up. 2011 second business. 14,000. The notation. D's idea, retail, P confident, I am not. 2013 living expenses, Daniel's second divorce. Monthly amounts 9 months running, and then 2003. I had skipped it in my first read, gone forward before I went back. I turned the pages until I found it. The entry was short, 4 lines. R's life insurance. P changed the beneficiary, 80/20D. I signed, P's decision. I read it 3 times, my father's life insurance policy. The one I had assumed for my entire adult life was split evenly between me and my brother. Changed in 2003. 20 years ago, 80% to Daniel, 20 to me, signed by Raymond. Noted in his handwriting with those 4 words that told the whole story of who my father was and what he lived with. P's decision. I signed. I put the pad face down on the desk. I picked up my phone. I called my cousin Linda. Linda was the one who mentioned it, Easter 2016, a passing comment that sent me to the county auditor's website at 11 o'clock that night. I had never asked her how she knew. She picked up on the 3rd ring. I said, Linda, I need to ask you something. The Easter when you mentioned the house, how did you know Daniel was thinking of selling it? A short silence. Then, Caroline, I've always felt bad about how that came out. I'm not calling to make you feel bad. I just need to know where you heard it. Another silence, shorter. She'd made a decision. Daniel told me, she said. At the Hendersons' 4th of July barbecue, 2014. He was talking to a few of us and he said the Elmridge house would be his eventually. He said it like it was already decided, like it was just a matter of paperwork. The deed wasn't filed until March 2015. He said it like it was settled, Linda said. I assumed you knew. I assumed it was a family decision that had already been made. Caro, I'm so sorry. I should have said something sooner. I thanked her. I told her it wasn't her fault. I meant it wasn't. She had assumed I was part of a conversation that had happened without me about something that was mine. He said it in 2014, at a barbecue, to cousins and neighbors, casually, as though announcing what he was having for lunch, while my father was alive and showing signs of cognitive decline, while my mother was, as I would later learn, visiting attorneys. He was telling people at family gatherings that the house would be his before the paperwork was even filed. Stay with me, because what's in this legal pad is going to tell you exactly how long this had been in motion. I sat with the phone in my hand. I thought I finally had the whole picture. Then I picked up the legal pad again, and I turned the pages. The entries continued past 2013, past the divorce payments, past the business loans. I read forward, year by year, in my father's careful handwriting, watching the amounts and the notations, watching the shape of it grow larger than I had understood. And then I turned to a page dated February 2015, and I stopped breathing, because the entry wasn't about money. It wasn't about a transfer or a business or an account. It was about a doctor's appointment, and what that doctor had written in my father's file. 5 weeks before he signed a deed transferring the family home for $1. 5 weeks. I told my mother I was running errands. She was at the kitchen table with her second cup of coffee and her phone, already mid-conversation with Daniel, and she waved her free hand in acknowledgement without making eye contact. I picked up my keys. I picked up the legal pad. I put it in my bag. She didn't notice. She has never noticed the things I carry out of rooms. The Elmridge house is 47 minutes away. My hands know the turns before my mind does. I still had a key. I had never been asked to return it, and I had never offered. The house looked smaller than memory. They always do. The houses from childhood, they compress over the years until you stand in front of them as an adult and cannot quite reconcile the size of the place with the size of what happened inside it. The foreclosure notice was taped to the front door in a bright orange envelope, the kind designed to be seen. I unlocked the door and went in. The smell reached me before anything else. Old carpet, stale air, the particular stillness of a house where the heat has been set to minimum and nobody has opened a window in months. My mother's things were gone. She had taken what she needed before the bank's timeline closed in. But the furniture remained. The bank apparently had left personal contents. My father's desk was still there. Small room, desk at the window. The oak chair, a cushion Patricia had added that he never removed despite calling it unnecessary. I sat in it. It was the right size for a man who was not tall. I am not tall either. The desk surface came to exactly the right height. I put the legal pad in front of me and I sat in my father's chair at my father's desk, and I opened the page I had stopped at the night before. February 2015. The entry was 4 lines, like most of his entries, no more words than necessary. Dr. P says moderate impairment in complex decisions, told Patricia. She said it was fine to proceed. I asked what we were proceeding with. She said I didn't need to worry about the details. I read it twice. Then I read the next entry, which was dated 1 week later. P met with second attorney, did not tell me until after. Quitclaim on Elmridge. I asked her to wait. She said it was already scheduled. I set my hand flat on the page. My father was told by his doctor, in writing, on record, that he had moderate impairment in complex decision-making. He told my mother. My mother said it was fine to proceed. 5 weeks later, he signed a deed transferring the family home to my brother for $1. Patricia knew. She knew before the appointment. She had visited the first attorney in 2013. She had visited the second in early 2015, after the diagnosis, after Raymond told her what the doctor had said. She scheduled the signing anyway. She told my father he didn't need to worry about the details. Patricia built her entire plan on one assumption, that Raymond would not act, that he would see and grieve and record, and ultimately stay quiet. She had watched him do it for 40 years. She had no reason to believe he would do anything different at the end. She was almost right. My father was not a brave man in the way movies mean when they say brave. He was a man who stayed quiet when he should have spoken, and I spent years carrying anger about that silence, quiet anger, the kind you don't name, because naming it feels disloyal to someone you also loved. But sitting in his chair that afternoon, in the room where he spent 40 years keeping records of things he could not change, I understood something I had not let myself understand before. Some people cannot fight the battle directly, so they leave you the ammunition. If you have ever had someone who loved you quietly, imperfectly, in ways you didn't recognize until they were gone, you know exactly what I felt in that chair. I turned pages. I read the 2013 entry slowly. P visited attorney alone. Did not tell me. Asked about quitclaim options for Elmridge. I asked her why. She said she was planning ahead. She said both children would be provided for. Both children. My mother told my father that both children would be provided for. She said that to him directly. She said it knowing that the account she and Daniel shared had been running for 15 years. She said it knowing that the insurance beneficiary had already been changed. She said it knowing that the attorney she had visited alone was helping her draft a transfer that would give the house to Daniel entirely. She said both children would be provided for. That is not carelessness. That is not a mother who loved differently without understanding the cost. That is a woman who looked her husband in the eye and said the words she needed to say to keep him quiet for 2 more years. I sat with that for a long time. I almost missed it. The legal pad had been on my lap for 2 hours, and I was near the last written page. The final entry, 3 weeks before my father's death, which I had not yet let myself read when I noticed the back cover. Slightly thicker than it should have been, a small resistance when I pressed it. I opened the back cover fully. A sealed envelope tucked into the cardboard spine. White, letter-sized, slightly yellowed at the edges. And on the front, in handwriting I would know anywhere, David's handwriting, the specific upward slant of his capital letters, the way he always pressed slightly too hard with a pen. Open it when you need it. You'll know when. He had said those words to me from a hospital bed. I had filed them away with everything else from those 14 months that I was not ready to hold. I had known the envelope existed. I had not known where it was. I had assumed it was somewhere in the house, in a drawer, in a file box, somewhere he had left it for me to find. He had left it here, inside my father's legal pad, inside a box I almost donated. 2 men, one afraid, one dying, both of them betting on me to find it. I held it in both hands, 1 page inside. David was always economical. Then I opened it, 1 paragraph, his handwriting calm and deliberate even at the end. Ray signed an affidavit, notarized. I have the original. It's with James Whitfield at Whitfield and Crane. He's expecting your call. Don't wait too long. That was all. No explanation, no elaboration. David never explained what didn't need explaining. He had spent the last months of his life, the months when he should have been resting, when I was trying to get him to rest, meeting with my father. Without Patricia. Without Daniel. Without telling me, because he knew I would have asked him to stop, to save his energy, to let it go. He did not let it go. He got my father on record while Raymond could still speak clearly. He found an attorney. He had a document notarized 31 days before he died. He tucked a note inside a legal pad, and he trusted that I would find it when I was ready. I sat in my father's chair for a long time after I read that note. He stopped it the only way he could. He left me the record. David left me the door. I took out my phone. I looked up Whitfield and Crane. They were still there. I called. The receptionist put me through to James Whitfield directly. His voice was measured, unhurried, the voice of a man who had been waiting for a call he was told would eventually come. He said, "MS, Fletcher. We've been expecting your call for about 2 years. Your husband said you'd know when you were ready." I said, "I'm ready." He said, "Good, because there's more here than the affidavit. Your husband was thorough." I said, "He always was," and I meant it as the love it was. Whitfield and Crane occupied the 4th floor of a building on High Street that had probably been impressive in 1987, and had since settled into the particular dignity of a place that no longer needed to try. The elevator was slow. The carpet in the hallway was burgundy, slightly worn down the center. The receptionist offered me water, and I said yes, and then didn't drink it. These are the details you notice when your mind is working very hard beneath a surface it is determined to keep still. James Whitfield met me at the conference room door. I sat. I looked at the file on the table. It was thicker than I expected. I had told myself I was coming for the affidavit. I was not prepared for the rest of it. Whitfield opened the file without preamble. He is the kind of attorney who understands that some clients need to be eased into information and some clients need to be handed it directly. He read me correctly on the first meeting. "The affidavit is here," he said and slid it across the table. "Your husband had it notarized on October 14th, 2019. He passed November 14th. He did not waste time." I looked at my father's signature at the bottom of the page. Raymond Hayes, slightly uneven. His hands had not been steady in his last years, but legible, deliberate. The signature of a man who understood what he was signing and had chosen to sign it anyway. Whitfield gave me a moment. Then he continued. "David also instructed our office to begin estate discovery proceedings, informally, preliminary, before his death. He wanted to make sure that if you decided to pursue a claim, the groundwork was already laid." He set a second document on the table. "What we found during that process was not limited to the property transfer." I looked at the document, bank records, column after column of dates and amounts. "There was an account," Whitfield said, "that was not disclosed in your father's estate filing." He walked me through it methodically. Joint account, open 1998. Patricia Hayes and Daniel Hayes, not Raymond, not both parents, not the family. Patricia and Daniel. 25 years of deposits and transfers. The total, when his office had tallied it, $67,400. Directed entirely to Daniel. Not present in any estate documentation. Not mentioned anywhere in the filing my mother had submitted after Raymond's death. I looked at the numbers. The food truck venture in 2007. The retail business in 2011. The living expenses during Daniel's second divorce. 9 months of transfers, steady as a salary. I had seen all of this in my father's legal pad, but seeing it in bank records, official, institutional, printed on paper with account numbers and routing information was different. The legal pad was my father's private grief. This was evidence. "The account was still active when your father died," Whitfield said. I nodded. I had assumed as much. Then he said, "The account was still active when your mother walked up your front steps." I looked up. He slid a third page across the table. Recent transfers. The last 12 months. 3 of them, one in August, one in September, one in October. The October transfer was dated 11 days after my mother arrived at my house with 2 suitcases and a story about having nothing. I want you to sit with that for a moment. She sent him money the same month she stood on my porch telling me she had nothing left. She sat at my kitchen table. She drank my tea. She slept in my guest room and used my good towels and made herself comfortable in my home. And 11 days after she arrived, she sent Daniel money from an account that had never been disclosed to anyone, not to my father's estate, not to any court, not to me. I have the bank record. I am looking at it right now. Stay with me, because it gets bigger. I had walked into that conference room believing my mother had come to me because she was out of options. I was wrong. She came to me because Daniel told her to, because my house paid off, mine outright, stable in a way that nothing in my brother's orbit had ever been, was the next available resource. I was not a refuge. I was not a daughter she had turned to in a moment of genuine need. I was a contingency plan, not the money, the calculation. My name had come up as a solution to a problem they made together. She had never stopped categorizing me. I was still the category that absorbed what Daniel couldn't carry. Whitfield asked me then if I had any additional documentation from my father directly. I described the legal pad, the 40 years of entries, the notations beside each transfer, the final entry 3 weeks before Raymond's death. He was quiet for a moment. "Bring it," he said. "Bring all of it. If it's in his handwriting and it's dated, it matters. We can have it authenticated." He made a note. A 40-year contemporaneous record in the handwriting of the person whose estate is in dispute. That is not nothing, MS. Fletcher. That is considerable. Raymond kept the record because it was the only thing he could do. It turned out to be enough. Whitfield walked me to the elevator when we were done. He was efficient, not cold, but precise in the way of people who understand that clarity is its own form of kindness. Before I stepped in, he asked one more question. "Did your mother give any indication of how long she planned to stay?" I thought about the 2 suitcases, the way she had opened my cabinets without asking, the way Daniel's name moved through her sentences like a given, like a fixed point everything else organized around. "She packed for 2 suitcases worth of time," I said. He nodded slowly like that was the answer he had been expecting. Then he said, "MS, Fletcher, we need to move fairly quickly. The foreclosure on Elmridge is finalized in 60 days. After that, the asset is gone, but the account isn't." He held the elevator door for a moment. "And the account," he said, "is just the beginning." The doors closed. I drove home with both hands on the wheel. My mother had made dinner. The throw pillow was on the wrong side of the room, a cream-colored pillow always on the armchair. My mother had moved it to the sofa, the way you arrange things in a space you have decided is yours. I stood in the doorway and looked at it. Then I looked at my mother, settled on the sofa with the television murmuring at low volume, a cup of tea on the side table, her reading glasses pushed up on her head. Comfortable, arranged, the specific ease of a woman who has decided that temporary is a word that only applies to other people. I sat in the armchair, without the pillow. I did not say anything about the pillow. I am 54 years old. I have been managing my reactions to small appropriations my entire life. One more was not going to cost me anything. What it told me was useful. Her phone rang at 8:13. She glanced at the screen and her expression shifted, not dramatically, just the slight adjustment of a person who has received a call they were expecting and would prefer to take privately. She stood, smoothed the front of her cardigan, and carried the phone into the kitchen. I did not follow her. I did not need to. The kitchen in my house shares a wall with the living room, and the wall is not thick. I kept my eyes on the television. I did not turn up the volume. I heard fragments. "The house is fine, Daniel." A pause. "I told you just give it a little more time." Another pause, longer, her voice dropping slightly. "She doesn't know anything, Daniel. She's fine. You know how she is. She just gets on with it." You know how she is. She just gets on with it. She was telling my brother from my kitchen using my phone signal that I was manageable, that the situation was stable, that whatever timeline they had built together was still intact. She had no idea that the estate claim had been filed 4 days ago. I sat in the armchair with my hands in my lap, and I watched a nature documentary I was not watching, and I thought, 40 years of being underestimated is a long time, but sometimes it is exactly what you need. Daniel arrived 3 days later. I heard the car before I saw it, a rental, something mid-sized and anonymous, pulling into my driveway at 11 in the morning on a Tuesday. My mother was upstairs. I was at the kitchen table with coffee and a folder Whitfield had couriered over the previous afternoon. I closed the folder. I put it in the drawer beside the refrigerator. Then I went to the door. He looked the way Daniel always looks, put together in a way that costs more than it earns. Smiling before I opened the door fully, duffel bag over one shoulder. "Caro." He spread his arms slightly, not quite a gesture for a hug, more of a presentation of himself. "Mom said you'd been so great about everything. I just wanted to come say thank you in person." He did not ask if he could come in. He came in. He set his bag down in my entryway, not near the door, not tucked to one side, but in the center, the way you set something down in a space you have already decided belongs to you. He looked around the living room. He looked at the kitchen. He looked at the staircase. The specific, slow survey of a man who is calculating square footage. "It's a great space," he said. "Lots of room." He did not say, "I took the house that should have been partly yours." He did not say, "I was telling people at barbecues it would be mine before the paperwork was even filed." He did not say, "I knew." From the beginning, I always knew. He said lots of room, and he smiled. and he sat on my sofa like he had sat on sofas in my home 100 times, which he had not, because he had visited me exactly 4 times in 22 years of marriage, and twice of those were at David's funeral, and he looked at me with the particular ease of a man who has never once in his life been asked to account for himself. I went to the kitchen. I got him a glass of water I did not want to get him. I brought it back and I set it on the coffee table in front of him, and I sat in the armchair and I watched him drink it. The smile. That is what I keep coming back to. He walked into my house, into the house that should have been partly mine, funded in part by an inheritance that was redirected to him across 40 years of quiet transactions my father recorded and my husband compiled, and he smiled. The confident, unhurried smile of a man who has never felt the ground shift beneath him. If you know that smile, if someone in your family has given you that smile, in your own home, in your own doorway, after taking something that was yours and never once naming what they did, then you know there is only one thing you can do with it. Wait, because that smile has an expiration date. And I knew, sitting in that armchair, exactly when it was coming. My mother came downstairs 20 minutes after Daniel arrived. She greeted him with the warmth she has always reserved specifically for him. The full warmth, the unguarded kind, the kind I spent my childhood pressing my face against the glass of. They sat together on the sofa. I sat in the armchair. Patricia said, "Isn't it nice, the 3 of us like this?" Daniel said, "It really is. Caro, you've built something real here. You always do. You always do." 49 years old and still reaching for that sentence. The one that praises me for my competence as a way of explaining why I never needed anything from either of them. The family all-purpose tool. Compliment and dismissal in the same breath. I said, "Thank you, Daniel." I said it pleasantly. I meant none of it, but I have had decades of practice at that particular exchange, and one more did not cost me anything I could not afford. What I was thinking, sitting across from them both on my sofa in my house in my living room, was this: Whitfield filed the estate claim this morning. The bank records are authenticated. The affidavit is notarized. The legal pad is on a shelf in a law office on High Street, and neither of you has any idea. I have spent my entire life being the one who holds things quietly. For once, I was glad of it. Daniel stayed for dinner. He ate everything on his plate and complimented my cooking and helped Patricia with the dishes, and he was, for those 2 hours, exactly the brother I spent my childhood wishing he would be. Easy, present, asking questions and appearing to listen to the answers. Just before he left, Daniel stopped in the hallway. He had his duffel bag over his shoulder again. He looked at me, and for one moment, one unguarded second, something moved across his face that was almost a question, almost something real, like a man standing at the edge of saying the true thing, feeling the weight of it, choosing the familiar road instead. He didn't say it. He picked up his bag. He smiled. "This is going to work out, Caro," he said, "for everyone." He left. I locked the door behind him. I stood in the hallway for a moment with my hand still on the deadbolt. Then I took out my phone. Whitfield answered on the second ring. I said, "They're both here. What do we do next?" He said, "We let the paperwork do the talking." The estate claim had been filed that morning. Daniel and my mother had no idea, and the next morning they were about to find out. I asked Daniel to leave the evening before, not harshly, not with explanation. I knocked on the guest room door at 9 o'clock and I said, "I need to have a conversation with Mom tomorrow, just the 2 of us. Would you mind staying somewhere else tonight?" He looked up at me with an expression I had not seen before, something calculating that had arrived a number it didn't like. He said, "Is everything okay, Caro?" I said, "I'll feel better after we talk." He nodded slowly. He packed his bag. He didn't argue, which told me more than arguing would have. A man who had nothing to worry about would have asked questions. Daniel picked up his duffel and called a car and left without saying goodnight to Patricia. She came to my door 10 minutes later. "What's going on?" she said. Daniel seemed upset. We're going to talk tomorrow, I said. Get some sleep. She looked at me for a moment, trying, I think, to read something in my face. Whatever she was looking for, she didn't find it. I have had 54 years of practice at keeping my face from giving anything away. She went back to the guest room. I went to the kitchen table and I sat with the folder until midnight, going through it one final time. Not because I needed to review it, because I needed to be certain, completely, irrevocably certain that every page said exactly what I knew it said. It did. The next morning, I cleared the dining room table entirely. No placemats, no centerpiece, just the table's solid oak, the one David and I bought at an estate sale 20 years ago, the one that has held every important thing that has happened in this house since. I set 2 cups of tea. I set the folder to my right. I set the legal pad beside the folder, closed. Patricia came downstairs at 8:30. She looked rested, composed. She had been managing things her entire life. She sat across from me. She looked at the folder. She looked at the legal pad. She folded her hands on the table. She said, "You've been to see someone." Not a question. "Yes," I said. "An attorney." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Then she straightened slightly and said, "Caroline, whatever you think you found, I need you to understand that your father and I made decisions together. Everything we did as a family. Daniel needed support that you simply didn't require. You were always so capable. You never asked for help. I asked for $15,000 in 2007, I said. To help David start his practice. You said you didn't have it." She opened her mouth. 6 weeks later, I said, "You gave Daniel $22,000 for a food truck." Silence. "I'm not bringing that up to argue about it," I said. "I'm bringing it up because it's in the folder." I opened the folder. I did not speak while I worked. I laid the documents on the table one by one, not quickly, not dramatically, just steadily, the way you place things that have weight and deserve to land properly. The quitclaim deed first. March 11, 2015. Transfer price, $1, both signatures, notarized. She looked at it. She said nothing. The physician records. Dr. Patel's February 3 assessment, 5 weeks before the signing. Mild to moderate impairment in complex decision-making. My father's own note in the legal pad, cross-referencing the appointment. She said it was fine to proceed. I asked what we were proceeding with. Patricia's hands moved slightly on the table. A small tightening, the insurance records, 2003, the beneficiary change, 80% to Daniel, 20 to me. My father's notation, P's decision. I signed, she said. Raymond agreed to all of these things. I know he did, I said. That's actually the next document. The affidavit, signed October 14, 2019, notarized, witnessed by David Fletcher 31 days before his death. I slid it across the table, and I watched my mother read it in my father's own words, that the transfer had been presented to him as a temporary tax arrangement, that he believed the property would be divided between his children upon her death, that he had signed under the belief that the document was routine, that his wife had told him it was nothing he needed to read carefully. Patricia set the affidavit down. Her face had changed. Not broken, not yet, but the architecture had shifted. The composed certainty she had carried into this room was doing something different now. Reorganizing, looking for another position. She said, "He wasn't well when he signed that. He didn't always understand what he was saying at the end." I looked at her. "That is exactly what the physician records document," I said. "Thank you for making that point." I placed the bank records next. 25 years of transfers. $67,400. The account she had opened with Daniel in 1998 and never disclosed. The transfers that continued after my father died. The 3 transfers from the previous 12 months, including the one dated 11 days after she arrived at my door. She looked at that page for a long time. Then she said quietly, almost to herself, the sentence I have heard my entire life. "Daniel just needs a little more help. You've always been the one who figures things out on her own. Even now, She said it, and then, almost in the same breath, "The way you say something you have said 10,000 times," she said. "You've always been so capable, Maggie." I looked at her. I said, "My name is Caroline." She blinked, like she hadn't noticed, like she still hadn't noticed. That was the whole answer right there. Even sitting at a table covered in documents that proved what 40 years of that sentence had built, she said it, automatically, as though it were still true, as though it were still sufficient. I think in that moment, I understood my mother completely. Not charitably, completely. She was not performing, she was not deflecting. She genuinely believed it. She had believed it so long and so consistently that it had become the organizing principle of every decision she had ever made. And she could not, even now, see it as anything other than motherhood. That is not a defense, but it is the truth. I set Raymond's voice memo transcript on the table last. 1 page. David had typed it out, formatted it cleanly, had it included in the file at Whitfield's office. My father's words, recorded in his own voice in the autumn of 2019, when his mind was still clear enough to speak in complete sentences about things he had spent decades not speaking about. Caroline was never told. I want her to know I knew it wasn't right. I want her to know I tried to tell Patricia, and she didn't listen, and I wasn't strong enough to push it further. Patricia, read it. I watched her read it. I watched her read her husband's words describing her behavior in his own voice, recorded and notarized and preserved by the man who loved their daughter in the way they had not. Then I picked up the legal pad. It is yellow, college-ruled. The cover is worn at the corners. 40 years of handling, of being carried between desk and briefcase and back again, of pages turned and turned and turned by hands that pressed slightly too hard because Raymond Hayes was a man who treated the act of writing as something that deserved commitment. It is lighter than it looks. It always surprises me how light it is for everything it contains. I opened it to the last entry, 3 weeks before my father's death. His handwriting slightly slower than the earlier pages, slightly larger but precise. Still precise to the end. M. Deserved better. I am sorry I was not braver. D. Has the rest. I turned it to face her. I said, "He kept this for 40 years. He left it for me." Patricia looked at the page. She looked at it for a long time, then she looked up at me and she said, "Caroline, you have to understand that your father and I closed the folder." I said, "My attorney has copies of everything on this table. The estate claim was filed 4 days ago. You'll be hearing from Whitfield and Crane." I paused. "You don't need to explain anything to me. I just needed you to know that I know." I stood. I carried my tea to the counter. I said with my back to her quietly, "You can stay through the end of the month. After that, Daniel will need to make arrangements." I did not turn around. The room behind me was completely silent, not the silence of someone thinking, the silence of someone for whom the architecture has finally, completely given way. For the first time in 54 years, Patricia Hayes had nothing to say. I had imagined that moment so many times. I did not cry. I did not need to. Because here is what I know about the truth. It does not need you to be loud. It does not need you to perform. It does not need your voice to shake or your hands to tremble or your face to show everything you have carried. The truth just needs to be accurate, and everything on that table was accurate. Every single page. My father made sure of that. David made sure of that. And I, the one who figures things out on her own, made sure it reached the table. My mother left without finishing her tea. I heard her in the guest room for a long time afterward. The sound of drawers opening, things being shifted, the particular movement of a person who is not packing but is not staying either. Somewhere between the two, I sat at the dining room table by myself until the light through the east window changed from white to gray. I thought about calling someone, a friend, my cousin Linda. I thought about it and then I thought, not yet. There is one more thing, David's phone. It is in the drawer of my home office desk, in a case I bought him for his birthday the year before he was diagnosed. I charged it periodically because I could not bring myself not to. I have the transcript of the voice memo, I have read it 40 times, I know it by heart, but I have not yet pressed play. I have not yet heard my father's voice come out of that speaker and fill a room that Raymond Hayes never once stood in. I am not ready for that yet, but I will be. And when I am, I'll know. My mother left on a Thursday. She came downstairs with both suitcases. The wheel caught on the hallway rug. I freed it. She said, "Thank you." I said, "Of course." In the kitchen doorway, she stopped. She stood with her back to me for a moment, looking at the room or not looking at it, I couldn't tell. Then she turned. She said, "I didn't think you needed." I turned from the window. I said, "I know." That was all. She nodded once, the slight nod of a woman absorbing something she cannot argue with. Then she went out the front door. I heard the car door close. I heard the engine, then nothing. I stood at the kitchen window for a long time, the neighbor's yard, the bare November trees, the particular quiet of a house that has returned to itself. I had expected to feel something large, relief or grief or the specific exhaustion of a long thing finally finished. I felt none of those things. I felt still. The settlement meeting was on a Tuesday in December. I did not attend. I sent Whitfield. I was home that day on the back porch, which faces east, which was cold enough that morning to see my breath. The porch rail was damp from overnight frost. I had my coffee in both hands and I watched the neighbor's dog, a retriever named, I believe, Gerald, run circles in the yard next door for reasons known only to him. Whitfield called at 11:14. He said, "It's done." He told me the terms. The foreclosure proceeds, redistributed to include my rightful share. The undisclosed account, subject to estate recovery, a formal finding on record that it existed and had been concealed. A structured repayment agreement from Daniel, covering a portion. Not all of it, because Daniel does not have all of it. He has never had all of anything. But enough. Enough that the record reflects what happened. Enough that the word concealed appears in a legal document with his name beside it and my name in the restitution column. I said, "Thank you, James." He said, "Your husband did most of the work." I said, "I know." I meant it as the truth it was, and the grief it was, and the love it was, all three at once. The way things are when someone is gone and you are still living in the life they helped you build. Gerald was still running circles. I watched him until he stopped. Daniel did not come to the settlement meeting. He sent his attorney, a younger man, according to Whitfield, who looked uncomfortable the entire time and said very little. Daniel posted on Facebook in March, "Family is complicated, choosing peace," 14 likes. The paperwork has already chosen something else. 3 women from my mother's church stopped calling. One sent a card, "Thinking of you," nothing else. My mother did not call me. I did not call her. Everything after that was just the world catching up to the documents. 6 months after my mother left, I reorganized the shelf in my home office. It is the same office. Same room where the box sat unopened on the desk that first night. Same shelf, high up, the kind you need a step to reach. David's jacket still on the back of the door. I have not moved it. I find I do not want to. I was pulling things down to dust behind them when my hand found something in the back corner of the middle drawer. A phone, in a gray case. The corner slightly scuffed. David's phone. I had kept it without making a decision to keep it. It had moved from the hospital bag to the bedside table to this drawer over the course of 4 years, always present, never examined. The way you keep some things, not because you know what to do with them, but because putting them somewhere final requires a certainty you don't yet have. I plugged it into the charger on the desk. I waited. The screen lit up. I sat in the desk chair and I held it. The case was warm now from the charger, the particular warmth of a screen that has been off a long time and is learning to be on again. I went to the voice memos. There was only one. I had the transcript. I had read it 40 times, but I had not pressed play. 6 months of settling until what was left was just my life. The quiet that is not empty but simply mine. I pressed play. My father's voice came out of the speaker and filled the room. slightly slow, slightly halting, the careful enunciation of a man who knows he is being recorded and wants to be precise, but clear, recognizably him. The voice I grew up with, the voice from holiday dinners and Sunday phone calls, and the one time he called me at college just to ask how I was and stayed on for 40 minutes because neither of us wanted to be the one to hang up. He said my name, not Maggie, not Caro. Caroline. He said it at the beginning of a sentence. Caroline was never told. And then he said it again near the end in a different register, softer. I want Caroline to know I knew it wasn't right. He named me. Twice, in his own voice, on a record that now exists in a law office and an estate file and a drawer in my home on a street he never visited. He named me the way you name someone when you want to make sure there is no ambiguity about who you mean, who you are talking about, who you loved and failed and are trying at the end to reach. I sat on the floor, not dramatically, just slid down from the chair until my back was against the desk and my legs were in front of me on the rug. I listened to the rest of it. The amounts, the dates, the careful accounting of what Patricia had done and what Raymond had seen and what Raymond had not been strong enough to stop. And then the pause, the specific pause of a man arriving at the thing he most needs to say. I loved both my children. I want the record to reflect that. I did not cry. I had done that already in November, when the settlement came through, sitting in the car in my own driveway for 20 minutes before I came inside. In February, going through David's desk and finding a handwritten grocery list from the week before his diagnosis, the ordinary tragedy of milk, coffee, the good bread. I had done my crying in private and on my own schedule, the way I have always done everything that matters. I sat on the floor of my office and I listened to my father's voice until the memo ended and the room was quiet again. I set the phone on the desk. I set it beside the legal pad, which was there, where I had left it after Whitfield returned it, yellow and college-ruled and worn at the corners, lighter than it looks for everything it holds. I looked at the two objects, David's phone, Raymond's handwriting, two men who loved me in the imperfect, limited, costly ways that people love when they are also afraid. David had not been afraid. David had been dying, which is different, but he had been careful. He had been thorough. He had spent the last months of his life in an attorney's office and at my father's kitchen table building something for a woman he knew would need it and would not ask for it, because she had spent her entire life not asking. Raymond had been afraid. And he had documented anyway. 40 years of yellow pages, precise and quiet, the long, slow act of a man who could not say the true thing out loud but could not bring himself not to write it down. It is not enough. What either of them did, measured against what I deserved, is not enough. It is also something. It is, in the particular arithmetic of families and love and the things that are left behind, something considerable. I picked up the legal pad. I turned to the back. Near the last page of Raymond's entries, there are clean pages, college-ruled, unmarked, the yellow slightly brighter where no pen has pressed. I found one. I set the pad flat on the desk. I wrote the date at the top. My handwriting, nothing like my father's. Larger, looser, the handwriting of a woman who was never an accountant and never needed to be precise about numbers because she was precise about everything else. I wrote, I am done waiting for them to see me. I always knew who I was. I read it once. Then I closed the pad. People ask me sometimes, and maybe you have been wondering the same thing sitting with this story, whether I am angry, whether I wish I had confronted them sooner, said more. Demanded what I was owed while there was still time to demand it face to face, while my father was alive, while David was alive, while the house was still standing. Whether I wish I had made more noise. I spent a long time asking myself that same question, in the years between finding out and being ready. In the nights between David dying and the porch light clicking on to find my mother in the driveway. Here is what I know now. The anger was never the point. The truth was the point, and the truth, when it finally lands, does not need you to be loud. It does not need you to be righteous or dramatic or certain of your own virtue. It just needs to be accurate. Everything my father wrote on that legal pad was accurate. Every entry David compiled was accurate. Every document on that dining room table was accurate. And finally, after 54 years of being told I was fine, of being categorized as the one who figures things out on her own, of being the one who showed up while someone else got the credit, finally. So was I. The legal pad is on the desk now, closed, beside David's phone, which I have plugged back in because it seemed wrong to let it go dark again. Outside, Gerald is running circles in the yard next door. Some things don't change. My father's handwriting is inside, 40 years of it, and at the back, on the last written page in different handwriting, my own, a date and 2 sentences. I do not need to open it to know what it says. I kept it, not because I needed the proof anymore, because my father's handwriting deserved to be next to mine. If this story felt familiar, if you have ever been the one who held everything together while someone else took the credit, you are in the right place. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if this was your family too, drop a comment. I read every single one. Take care of yourself.